Welcome to the Reality Revolution. Today, I want to explore another wonderful lecture by Alan Watts. In my first lecture, I kept on saying Alan Watt says, so please forgive me, but I really, really love his teachings. And I really want to go over another one, which is along the same lines as the dramatic model of reality. I have another episode where we talk about Alan Watts' idea of reality being that we're in this drama. And he has another lecture called The Eternal Transaction, and it really fits with my current teachings that we've gone over on the Reality Revolution podcast. When Neville Goddard says, I am God, or we are God, what does he mean? Are you envisioning God in the way that your church taught you? How is it that you define God? Alan Watts was an incredible scholar of spirituality, consciousness, and reality creation. And this is another wonderful lecture. I, of course, recommend you listen to his wonderful lectures specifically. I wanted to go over some of this stuff and give my versions on it and go into a deep dive of some of this information. So, the one we're doing today is called The Eternal Transaction. So, in the dramatic myth, Watts says, life as we experience it is a big act. And behind the big act is the player. And the player is the self, the Atman. In Hindu philosophy, that's you. Only you are playing hide and seek, but you won't admit it, because you have deliberately forgotten who you really are, which is the foundation of the universe, or the ground of being. As the 20th century theologian Paul Tillich calls it, well, you might remember who you really are somewhere back there or somewhere deep, deep down, but you still can't admit it. So to bring this knowledge to the front, you have to be kidded out of the game. We define some actions as voluntary, and we feel in control of those. And then there are those things we consider involuntary. But the dividing line between the two is very arbitrary. For example, moving your hand. When you move your hand, you feel that you decide whether to open or close it. But how do you decide? And before you decide, do you decide to decide? No, you just decide to open your hand. But how do you do that? And if you don't know how you do that, is the action voluntary or involuntary? Or take breathing as another example. You can control your breath, but when you don't think about it, you keep on breathing. So is breath voluntary or involuntary? Or both? It's arbitrary. Similarly, we have an arbitrary definition of the self. We think of the self as something with volition, defined with actions we do. But that doesn't include such essential functions as breathing. Most of the time, our heartbeat, the activity of the glands, digestions, circulation, growing bones, and so on. Even so, you do those things, don't you? Of course. And when you get with yourself and find out that you are all these processes, a strange thing begins to happen. You discover that you are one with the universe. The involuntary circulation of your blood is one continuous process with the shining stars. And if you find out that you are circulating your blood, you will also discover that you are shining the stars. Because your physical organism is one continuous process with everything else going on. Waves are continuous with the ocean. Your body is continuous with the total energy system of the cosmos. It's all you. But you're playing the game that you're just this tiny little bit of everything. Omnipotence doesn't mean you know how everything is done. It's just doing it. You don't have to be able to translate it into language. Look, suppose when you got up in the morning, you had to switch your brain on, and you had to wake up every single system of your body and activate all the circuits necessary for life. Your day would never get started. All those things need to be happening at once. How does a centipede control 100 legs at once? It doesn't. They just move. The centipede doesn't have to think about it. In the same way, you unconsciously perform all the various activities of your organism. Only unconsciously isn't the right word. That sounds sort of dead. Superconsciously is a better choice. And what is consciousness? It's simply a specialized form of awareness. When you look around the room, you are conscious only of those details you notice. But you see far more than you notice because you don't focus your attention on every little object. In a recent episode that I had on the 12 Lessons of Raja Yoga, the yogis teach going into a room and increasing your attention of things. And I have learned how much I do not notice. And I'm just wondering if anybody listening to this has the same. We go through life just not noticing so much. But consciously, but subconsciously or superconsciously, we may be aware of so much more. Watts continues by saying, similarly, you don't focus your attention on the minute operations of your thyroid gland. And you don't focus your attention on how you make the sun shine. Let's connect this with the problem of birth and death. A lot of people are afraid that when they die, they're going to have to put up with everlasting non-existence. But that's not actually an experience. When I was a child, I often imagined what it would be like to go to sleep and never wake up. But if you think about the long enough, another question will come to you. That is, what was it like to wake up after having never gone to sleep? I mean, what was it like to wake up when you were born? See, when you can have the experience of nothing. So after you're dead, the only thing that can happen is the same experience that happened when you were born. After people die, other people are born, and they're all you. It's just that you can only experience one life at a time. Wherever beings exist throughout all the galaxies, you are all of them. When they come into being, that's you coming into being. You don't remember the past in the same way that you don't have to think about how to make your thyroid work. You don't have to know how to shine the sun. You just do it, just as you breathe without thinking about it. Doesn't this astonish you? That you are this fantastically complex thing, that you're performing all these seemingly impossible functions without any education in how to do it. You are a miracle. The point is that from a strictly physical, scientific standpoint, this organism is a continuous energy with everything else that's going on. If I am my foot, I am the sun. And yet we persist with our little partial view. No, I'm just something in this body. I'm just this ego. What a joke. The ego is nothing other than the focus of conscious attention. It's like radar on a ship. It's a troubleshooter. Conscious attention is a designed function of the brain to scan the environment for trouble. And if you identify yourself as the troubleshooter, you define yourself as living in a perpetual state of anxiety. The moment you cease to identify with the ego and become aware that you are the whole organism, you realize how harmonious it all is. Your organism is a miracle of harmony. All these things functioning together, even minuscule creatures fighting each other in your bloodstream and eating each other up. If they weren't doing that, you wouldn't be healthy. What appears to be discord on one level is harmony at a higher level. All the discord in your life and in the lives of others at a higher level of the universe, all of that is healthy and harmonious. This makes me think of my episode on the law of one and how the universe has both good and bad, and we have focus on self and focus on service to self. And I've seen people question, why would we do this? But it makes the universe harmonious. There's reasoning behind everything. Sometimes we don't even realize it, depending on the level that we're at. Watts continues by saying, everything you are and do at that higher level is magnificent and free of blemish, just like patterns in waves, markings in marble, or the rippling movement of a cat. The world is really okay, and it couldn't be anything else. Otherwise, it couldn't exist. Physical and spiritual are out-of-date categories. It's all a process. There isn't stuff on one hand and form on the other. It's just pattern. Life is a pattern. It's a dance of energy. I don't claim to have any private revelations about this. I don't have any mystical knowledge about any higher vibratory plane. All this is standing right in front of you. It's just a question of how you look at it. When you realize this, the most extraordinary thing happens. Some people will use the symbolism of God as a brilliant light, only somehow veiled, hiding underneath all the forms you see. But the truth is actually funnier than that. You're looking at the brilliant light right now, the experience you're having right now, which you might call ordinary, everyday consciousness, is it. And when you find that out, you laugh yourself silly. That's the great discovery. In other words, when you really start to see things and you look at an old paper cup, you realize that old paper cup is the brilliant light of the cosmos. Nothing could be brighter. 10,000 suns couldn't be brighter. It's just that all the points of infinite light are tiny when you see them in the cup, so they don't blow your eyes out. Actually, the source of light is in the eye. If there were no eyes to see the world, the sun would not be light. You evoke light out of the universe in the same way you evoke hardness out of wood, by virtue of having soft skin. Wood is only hard in relation to soft skin. Your eardrum evokes sound out of the air. This is how you call into being the whole universe: light, color, hardness, heaviness, everything. But we've sold ourselves different mythology. When people begin to discover how big the universe actually is, they conceived the idea that we live on this little planet in a solar system on the edge of a galaxy, a minor galaxy. And they thought, well, we really are unimportant after all. God isn't there, and He doesn't love us, and nature doesn't give a damn. And we put ourselves down with that mythology, whereas in actuality, it's us. This funny little creature crawling on this planet way out in space, somewhere, who has the ingenuity by nature of this magnificent organic structure to evoke the universe out of what would otherwise be mere quanta. This little ingenious organism on this planet is what the whole show is growing so that it can realize its own presence. What do we do with that knowledge? If that's the state of affairs, which it is, the conscious state you're in at this very moment is identical to the divine state. And if you do anything to make that state different, it shows you don't understand that it is so. The moment you start practicing yoga or prayer or meditation or indulging in any sort of spiritual cultivation, you get in your own way. The Buddha said that we suffer because we desire. So if we can give up desire, we won't suffer. But that isn't the last word. That was merely the opening to a greater dialogue. See, if you tell someone to get rid of desire, all they end up doing is desiring not to desire. You can't give up desire. It's like telling someone to be unselfish or get rid of their ego or let go and relax. Why would you want to do all that? Only because you're trying to beat the game. Because you're still operating under the hypothesis that you are different from the universe, so you want to get one up on it. And competing with the universe just reveals that you don't understand that you are the universe. You still think there's a real difference between self and other, but the two are mutually necessary, just like the poles on a magnet. The guru wants to get this across to you. However, since you're operating under an absurd hypothesis, the guru has to work with that. So he or she runs you through the mill in order to get you to be even more ridiculous, hard, and assiduous than usual. If you put yourself in a contest with the universe, the guru will stir up that contest until it becomes ridiculous. That's why the great teachers give tasks like abandon your ego, or thou shalt love thy Lord God. Well, that puts you in a double bind. You can't love on purpose. You can't be purposely sincere. It's like trying to not think of an elephant. Christianity is rigged this way. We're told to feel very sorry for our sins, but we all know that we're not. We think we ought to feel sorry, so we try to be penitent or try to be humble. And the more assiduously we practice, the phonier the thing gets. It's the technique of reductio ad absurdum. If you think you have a problem, that you're this troubled little ego, a Zen master will say, show me. I want to see this ego thing that is such a problem. When Bodhidharma went to China, a disciple approached him and said, I have no peace of mind. Please help me pacify my mind. And the Bodhidharma said, okay, let me see this mind. Bring it to me and I'll pacify it. And the flummoxed student replied, I can't. When I look for it, I can't find it. And the Bodhidharma said, there, it's pacified. When you look for your own mind, that is to say your own particularized center of being that is separate from everything else, you won't be able to find it. But the only way you'll know it isn't there is if you look for it hard enough to find out that it isn't there. That's why gurus of all types tell you to know yourself, to look within, to find out who you really are. Because the harder you look, the less you will find, and then you'll realize it was never there in the first place. There isn't a separate you. Your mind is what there is. It's everything. But the only way to find that out is to delve into the state of delusion as hard as possible. Okay, maybe it isn't the only way, but it's the one way. Almost all spiritual disciplines, meditations, prayers, and so on, are ways of persisting in folly. They're methods of resolutely and consistently doing what you're already doing. If a person believes the world is flat, you can't talk him out of that. He knows it's flat. He looks out his window and he sees that the world is obviously flat. So the only way to convince him otherwise is to persuade him to go and try to find the edge. Walk due west in a straight manner along the same line of latitude, and you'll eventually get back to the point from where you started. That will convince him. And that's the only way to teach him, because people can't be talked out of their illusions. Do you see this today? Of course, we see this when it comes to politics. People will believe something, and they will look for something to confirm their beliefs. Can they change their mind? No, you cannot change their mind. They have to literally see it to change their illusion. There is another possibility, Watts says, but it's more difficult to describe. What if this moment, this one right now, is eternity? We have somehow convinced ourselves of the notion that this moment is rather ordinary, that we don't feel very well. that we're vaguely frustrated and worried and so on, and all of this ought to change. But you don't need to do anything at all. This is it. And you mustn't try not to do anything either, because that's still doing something. See, how do you explain that? You can't. That's why Zen teachers use shock treatment. Zen stories are full of teachers that unexpectedly hitting their students or shouting at them or surprising them in some way, because it's that jolt that suddenly brings you here. And there's no road to here because you're already here. Do you see that? I see that with many teachers and coaches that I've had. Tony Robbins is a master. When I learned neuro-linguistic programming, it was the idea of shocking someone to change the pattern interrupt. As Watts says, it's like the story of the American tourist in England who asks some yokel the way to Upper Tottenham, a little village. The yokel thinks about it, scratches his head, and says, "Well, I do know where it is, but if I were you, I wouldn't start from here." So whether you ask how you can know God or how you can attain nirvana, they are the wrong questions. Why do you want nirvana? The fact that you want to attain it is the one thing preventing you from achieving it. You already have nirvana. Of course, it's your privilege to pretend that you don't, if that's your game. To think that you're just some ego. Well, when you finally want to wake up, you will, just like that. If you're not awake, it shows you don't want to be awake yet. You're still playing the hide part of the game. It's still just the self pretending it's not the self. When you realize this, the distinction between voluntary and involuntary behavior disappears. The things you think are under your control and the things you think go on outside of you begin to feel exactly the same. You watch other people moving and you realize it's you making that happen, just as it's you making your blood circulate. At this point, if you don't fully understand, you might go crazy in the sense of feeling you are God, in some kind of Jehovah sense of the word. That is to say that you actually have power over other people and you can alter what they're doing. It's not that you discover omnipotence in some crude, literal kind of biblical way. If you actually think that you're Jesus Christ and that everybody ought to fall down and worship you, then you have your wires crossed. You may have had an experience of realization, but when you went astray, you didn't know how to interpret it. But you discover that you are God. You should also see that everyone else is too. I have encountered this in teaching Neville Goddard. People get this concept. Maybe it's from an earlier concept of God, that when Neville says, "I am God," that only that person is God. I've had discussions with people that literally treat me like I was created by them and that I have no self-control, no will of my own. But what if it's even greater than that? What if we are all God? Watts says we open our eyes and look around and think that everything we see is outside. It seems that way because that's how it feels in our head. But there's this space behind the eyes where all this people sitting around, the colors of the room, is appearing in the nervous system. What we see out there is actually a neurological experience. If you realize that, if it hits you as deeply true, then you might assume that all the external world is inside your skull. But you've got your wires crossed. You haven't realized that your skull is in the external world. It's inside you and you're inside it. What kind of situation is this? The individual and the world don't interact. The relationship is transactional. And this is where we get the title of this lecture, The Eternal Transaction, that is so beautiful. Watts says, for example, when you buy or sell a house, those aspects, buying and selling, can't happen by themselves. There can't be an act of buying unless there's a simultaneous act of selling, and vice versa. In the same way, the relationship between the organism and the environment is transactional. The environment grows the organism, and the organism creates the environment. The organism turns the sun into light, but it requires an environment containing a sun in order to exist. It's all one process. It isn't that organisms came into this world by accident or chance. This world is the sort of environment that grows organisms. And it has been that way from the beginning. From the very first moment of the Big Bang, if that's the way the whole thing started, organisms like you and me were involved. Here's another example. Let's say we have an electric current running through a wire that goes all the way around the earth. Keep in mind that the electric current doesn't behave like water in a pipe. At the negative pole, and the current won't even start until the switch is closed from the positive pole. It won't begin unless the point of arrival is there. Now, it might take that current a while to get going and circuit if it's going all the way around the planet, but the finishing point must be closed before it will even start from the beginning. In the same way, although it took billions of years for primitive life to arise on Earth after the Big Bang, life was implied from the very beginning. It takes time for an acorn to turn into an oak, but the oak is already implied in the acorn. It's all one process. Here's what awakening really involves: a re-examination of our common sense. We have all these ideas built in to us that seem unquestioned and obvious, and our speech reflects them. Face the facts is a common phrase. For example, as if facts were something outside of us, as if life were something we encounter as foreigners. See, our common sense has been rigged. That's why we feel like strangers or aliens in this world, and the separation feels utterly plausible. It's only because that's how we're accustomed to thinking. But when you really start questioning this and exploring other ideas, you'll see it ain't necessarily so. When you question the basic assumption that underlie our culture, and you get a new kind of common sense, and it will become absolutely obvious to you that you are continuous with the universe. Not too long ago, people believed that the earth was flat. They knew it to be true with all their hearts. But then people started sailing all the way around the world and flying from here to there, and we gradually got used to thinking of the earth as globular. We just got used to it. Well, in the same way, it will one day be a matter of common sense to most people that we're all one with the universe. It'll be so simple, and maybe when that happens, we'll handle our technology with better sense. Maybe we'll act with love toward our environment instead of hate. So I just love this particular lecture. It goes on and expands on the idea of the dramatic model, that we're playing hide and seek with ourselves. The idea that we have these unconscious actions that are a part of what we do. And that once we really focus in on what makes our hair grow and what makes us breathe and our blood flow, that we become one with the universe. And I love this concept that we make the sun shine. His lectures always touch me. They answer questions or ask questions about reality that I always ask. So I would love to get your comments of what you think of Alan Watts' view of reality. For it interests me, and it's very consistent with what Neville Goddard says, and helps expand our understanding of what we think of when we think of God. Thank you for sharing this time with me on this journey of awakening that we are exploring by exploring lectures by Alan Watts. Let me know if you want me to do more of his lectures. I would love to. I think that they really expand upon our idea and open up our minds in many ways. Please check out any episodes of The Reality Revolution at therealityrevolution.com. For coaching, you can go to advancedsuccessinstitute.com. Thank you, and I send love to all of you, and welcome to The Reality Revolution.